good morning, or depending when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name is Ross, and I was always told I had a voice radio, so today I am delighted to be showing you a Donphan deck list. No, ladies and gentlemen, it is not my beloved Donphan Prime, who I've talked about on more than a couple occasions in these videos. I recently did a video about my Donphan deck. I'll pop a link in the description. Donphan is a Pokemon I love so much, I had a table at my wedding themed after it. If you don't believe me, here's the artwork I commissioned. I went pretty all in on the whole Pokemon thing. Anyway, Toby Woolner, a lovely, lovely UK player, affectionately known as Tubbs by literally everyone, just went and got 9th place at the Stuttgart Expanded Regionals with Donphan. And this wasn't a case of a fluke or a player who got really lucky or hit a bunch of good matchups. No, ladies and gentlemen, this is a deck that in Expanded at the moment is a really, really good deck. So let's have a gander, shall we? It's all based around the Donphan from Plasma Storm. Donphan from Plasma Storm is amazing and I love him. Mainly here, it's Spinning Turn. 40 damage, and you switch this Pokemon to the bench. Now, 40 damage doesn't sound like a huge amount, but you've got strong energy here. So now you're doing 60 damage and switching to the bench. And then you've got either Choice Band or Muscle Band. Against an EX or a GX, Choice Band means you do an extra 30, and against anything Muscle Band means you do an extra 20. So now you're kind of hitting 80 or 90, and then switching to the bench. Now there is a second attack here that you will be using occasionally, Wreck. It is 2 fighting and a double colourless, and it basically does 140 if you discard a stadium in play, but then of course it's 160 with a strong energy and 190 with a choice band, and you can even put more than one strong energy on. This is a Pokemon that really wants to use Spinning Turn every turn, and then just occasionally use a Wreck. The ideal situation here really is having a couple of strong energy on there, so you can keep just using Spinning Turn for lots of damage, but then being able to go, boom, now I popped a double colourless energy on here, now I'm using Wreck. Now this is a hit and run Pokemon, and really Donphan is, at least was the last great hit and run Pokemon, is coming back in Expanded. You need something to switch into, and we have a couple of really good options here for this particular deck. The number one option here is Wobbuffet. When Wobbuffet is in the active, your opponent does not have any abilities. I mean, neither do you, but you don't care because you're not using any abilities. The only abilities that are switched on are psychic abilities, which means both of you can use Tapu Lele, but that's pretty much it. So primarily here, you want to hit with Donphan and then just switch to the bench into a Wobbuffet, so your opponent has no abilities. We'll look a little bit at matchups in a moment, but imagine something like a Tapu Bulu Vikavolt deck that every single turn doesn't have access to Vikavolt. That they aren't winning that game, ladies and gentlemen. And of course, let's talk about it. Zoroark GX. It relies on abilities. You've got Wobbuffet, it's weak to fighting. You should be getting a one-hit KO on a Zoroark here, as soon as you can get a second strong energy on there. One strong energy in a choice band will mean you're only hitting for 90, 180 with weakness. If you can get a second strong energy there, you're getting a one-hit KO. But even having said that, you should be able to two-hit KO here with no issues and still beat Zoroark because, oh yeah, you've got 130 HP. Zoroark hits a maximum 120 against a non-EX, non-GX, unless they've got Skyfield out. But do remember, you are blocking their abilities. It's going to be difficult to get Skyfield out and then get all of the basics. The number one Zoroark archetype that saw play this weekend was with Execute, which is used, of course, because then as soon as you get your Skyfield out, you can use Propagate to get all the Execute on your bench. Oh, no, wait, you can't. Not if you've got a Wobbuffet in the active. To be honest here, ladies and gentlemen, as has always been the case, you are vulnerable if your opponent can hit a Guzma every turn, but most Zoroark X decks are only playing one, and also, they've got to hit the Guzma before they can start doing anything like trade to draw cards. Now, there are a couple of other blockers you use here. Basically, it's just Hooper from Shining Legends. It gives you immunity against EX and GX Pokemon. If you find yourself against a completely EX or GX deck, you just whack a Hooper in the active and you're sorted. Although if they're reliant on abilities, you may still be better off going Wobbuffet. A couple other Pokemon do see a little bit of play here. One Oricorio here just to take down Night March. It's still a good counter against Night March because they have lots of Pokemon in the discard and low HP Pokemon, and Oricorio drops 1 damage counter on their side of the field for each Pokemon they have in the discard for 1 colourless energy. We see a Bunnelby here. Bunnelby can be used to deck your opponent out, or it can be used to recover resources, and sometimes you need this. So let's say you're playing against a Wailord deck. Wailord's going to try and deck you out. You use Bunnelby to make sure you cannot be decked out. Let's say you're playing against a Garbodor. They want to take advantage of how many items you've played. You use Bunnelby to get your items out of the discard, so Garbodor's not doing very much damage. And then, of course, 1 Tapu Lele. You never want to play the Tapu Lele. You really don't want to play Tapu Lele, but sometimes you have to. You play 1 Ultra Ball here, so you can play Korrina for an Ultra Ball for a Tapu Lele. Maybe your Ultra Ball's prized, maybe your Lele's prized. This is an emergency, I've got nothing kind of card. So you really don't want to use it, so you're not playing more than 1. In terms of trainers here, it's expanded. We have Korrina. Korrina is absolutely wonderful. You can search your deck for a fighting Pokemon and an item and pop them into your hand. You can grab that float stone that you need to retreat Wobbuffet. You can grab yourself a Phanpy and so on and so forth. Consistency here is amazing. Professor Juniper, same as Professor Sycamore, discard your hand, draw 7 new cards, the most aggressive, fastest supporter in the format you need it. Couple copies of N. Sometimes you may go down a couple of prizes while you're setting up, or because your opponent can knock out a couple of Wobbuffet. N here is great for just slowing down your opponent if they take a fast start. It's also decent shuffle draw. You play a couple of Guzma here just because you sometimes want to knock out a Pokemon on the bench. And then there's a bunch of tech supporters. Professor Kukui does an extra 20 damage. Remember earlier when I was saying you needed 2 strong energy on a Donphan to KO a Zoroark? Well, that's not the case if you can play a Professor Kukui. And of course this is expanded, so Versus Seeker will help you find it. It is fun for hitting the numbers. Teammates just allows you to search for any 2 cards after you had a Pokemon KO'd the previous turn, which means when your opponent finally gets a KO on a Donphan, Wobbuffet, etc., you can search for any 2 cards. That sounds fun to me. And 1 copy of AZ just to pick up one of your Pokemon. Maybe it's to pick up a Wobbuffet if you don't have a float stone for this particular turn, or maybe it's just to pick up a damaged Donphan so you're not giving up prizes. You do have to discard cards when you pick up AZ, anything attached to the Pokemon, which you don't have to do with Ace Roller, but generally with Donphan here, you're only discarding 1 energy, and an undamaged Wobbuffet cannot be picked up with an Ace Roller, so AZ is the better choice. Speaking of choices, we are choosing to play Parallel City here. The reason we're playing Parallel City is again largely Zoroark. Just because we've got a good matchup doesn't mean we want to hurt them, because we do not want our opponent to play a Guzma and then be able to get a Skyfield down, then be able to get all their Execute down, etc, etc. We really want to stop them because Zoroark is everywhere, not to mention the fact that just putting your opponent down to 3 bench spaces in most matchups is still pretty annoying. I mean, especially when you put your opponent down to 3 bench Pokemon and then ability lock them, many decks struggle to come back from that. I'd love to play Fighting Stadium, but Fighting Stadium only does extra damage to EXs, and nowadays it's mostly GXs, Boo, Hiss, etc. Floatstone is played here just to retreat stuff like your Wobbuffet. Versus Seeker, it's expanded. Only 3 here. It's a space issue. Obviously, we'd like to play 4. A mixture of Choice Band and Muscle Band because there's way too many non-EX, non-GX Pokemon. Take something like a Pumpkaboo, for instance. 60 HP and a resistance to fighting. You've got to be getting a 1-hit KO on something like that. So a combination of Muscle Band and Strong Energy will get a KO nice and easily. Nest Ball helps you search out those basics and can be searched out with Korrina. And only 1 Ultra Ball because generally you've got Korrina. but you need the Ultra Ball to search out Tapu Lele, 1 Rescue Stretcher to recover Pokemon, and 1 Field Blower to get rid of pesky things like Fighting Fury Belt that might otherwise annoy you. And of course, your ace spec of choice here has got to be Computer Search, because the rule is very simple. If you need to get set up, you play Computer Search. If you should set up easily, but you need some extra stuff in the mid to late game, you use Dowsing Machine. This is a deck that needs to set up. As soon as you've got your Wobbuffet out and your Donphan hitting and switching to the bench, you should be in a pretty good position to win most of your matchups. So that's what you do. And then in terms of energy here, obviously we're playing 4 strong energy because it's amazing in Donphan, and we're only playing 2 double colourless along with some basic fighting obviously, and the reason is very simple. You only need it to do Donphan's big attack, you only need it for that wreck, and most of the time you're going to be okay. Just playing 2, you should have it most of the time when you need it. You do not want double colourless in the early game. And this deck is really set up in the current format. Against something like Zoroark, you're turning off their abilities while hitting for weakness, that's a huge advantage. Against something like Tapu Bulu Vikavolt, you're turning off their abilities while 2-hit KOing. You should absolutely smash that matchup. Against anything like Glaceon or Sylveon, which revolves around the Energy Evolution Eevee, if you start with a Wobbuffet, you win. And if you go first, so you can get a Wobbuffet in the active before they have a turn, you win. Because they're generally playing very few basics, so they start with an Eevee, they can't evolve it with the ability because you've got Wobbuffet out, you use 1 spinning turn for the game. It's basically a free win. Even something like Night March, yes, they can 1-hit KO you every turn, but you should be getting a 1-hit KO on Pumpkaboo and Joltik. And the fact that you're constantly switching into Wobbuffet means they're going to struggle to keep going. Night March needs to always have a Night Marcher and always have a double colourless, etc. Trying to get that without abilities can be very difficult. You should be heavily favoured in that matchup as well. It's not all good. If your opponent can actually get a Guzma every turn, they should be able to have a decent matchup, but even then they've got to be able to draw cards and get attackers, so maybe if Zoroark has a Guzma every turn, they'll be fine because they can trade, but even something like a Bulu deck, even if they've got a Guzma every turn, they're just not going to be able to set up because they're not drawing cards. And then of course there's Gardevoir, which is just a bad matchup. You're struggling to 2-hit KO, they're fairly easily 1-hit KOing, they've got Gallade that can get some fairly easy 1-hit KOs, and yeah, it's not looking great, ladies and gentlemen, plus they tend to play Octillery as well. Gardevoir is your bad matchup. But you've got a pretty good matchup against almost anything else. Tubbs ended up going 6-2 on the day, losing to a Gardevoir, as you should, and a Zoroark Execute deck that played free Guzma, which is unusual, and just had a Guzma every turn, ended up 9th, losing by about 2.5% of opponent's resistance, which is rubbish. But I'm still happy because Donphan is back, and huge thanks to Tubbs for sending me the picture of the deck list and having a chat with me and walking me through some of the things on Facebook. Tubbs is a lovely man. Now you know the deal, ladies and gentlemen. You need to get on it in the comment section. Do you think Donphan is back and viable? Do you think it's a flash in the pan? Let me know. Go nuts, but be nice. Make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at @TheWossy, and Twitch for some live action at twitch.tv/PTCGRadio. If you want to support the channel, get some bonus podcasts and so on, head on over to patreon.com/PTCGRadio. And do make sure you check out Wossy Plays for some more Wossy action. But by far the most important thing as always is to look after yourselves until next time. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.